It was a quiet Sunday morning when my husband, Jason, decided to do something sweet. We had just moved into our new home a few weeks ago, and we had spent the past couple of weekends unpacking boxes, organizing the house, and getting everything in place. I was exhausted. As much as I loved the idea of a fresh start, the stress of getting everything set up was wearing me thin. Jason, sensing my fatigue, offered to make me a cup of coffee, something he rarely did. Usually, it was my responsibility to brew the coffee in the morning, and while I didn't mind, it was always nice when he took the initiative. He promised me it would be the perfect cup, just the way I liked it. I smiled at him, feeling grateful for his thoughtfulness, and settled onto the couch, excited for a moment of peace. He returned a few minutes later, handing me a steaming mug. The moment I took a sip, though, I was taken aback. There was something wrong. The coffee tasted odd. It wasn't the usual, rich, smooth taste I was accustomed to. Instead, it had a strange, almost chemical flavor that I couldn't place. My eyes widened and I quickly set the mug down on the table. I didn't want to offend Jason, so I forced a smile and tried to act like everything was fine. But something about the taste unsettled me. Jason noticed my hesitation immediately. "Is everything okay? It's just how you like it, right?" I didn't want to make him feel bad, but the strange taste lingered in my mouth. I hesitated for a moment before I spoke. "It's fine. Just a little different, that's all." He looked at me with concern, but didn't say anything more. I could see the genuine effort he had put into making it, but something was off. The smell alone was enough to make my stomach turn a little. It wasn't the familiar coffee aroma I usually loved. It was sharp, almost metallic. I couldn't understand what had gone wrong. As I sat there trying to mask my discomfort, I glanced over at my sister-in-law, Lara, who was sitting nearby. She had been staying with us for a few days to help with the move, and I had grown quite close to her over the years. Lara's mug of coffee was sitting on the table next to hers, and as I looked at it, I noticed something curious. Her coffee looked almost the same as mine, but there was a subtle difference. It seemed a bit darker. Suddenly, an idea popped into my head. I quickly excused myself and walked over to Lara's mug. Without thinking, I swapped our mugs, trying to act as casual as possible. I sat back down on the couch, hoping Jason wouldn't notice, and took a sip from Lara's coffee. The moment the liquid hit my tongue, I felt a wave of relief. This was the coffee I was familiar with, smooth, warm, and comforting. I couldn't help but sigh, savoring the familiar taste. But as I looked back at Jason, my mind raced with a new question. What had happened to the coffee he made me? Why had it tasted so strange? Lara was still engaged in conversation with Jason, oblivious to the fact that I had just swapped our drinks. But as I sat there, sipping the coffee I knew so well, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Something had gone wrong with the coffee, and now I couldn't stop thinking about what might be hidden behind this strange morning. The more I sipped Lara's coffee, the more I began to relax, but my mind was still racing. Something about Jason's coffee just didn't sit right with me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the thought of it was gnawing at me. Why would he make such a strange cup of coffee, and why had it tasted so off? My senses were on high alert now, and I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. Jason and Lara continued chatting, and I casually kept sipping my coffee, trying to stay calm. I didn't want to cause any trouble, but I knew something was wrong. As I sat there, I started to observe Jason more closely. He seemed unusually quiet, almost distant. His eyes kept darting from me to Lara, as if he was trying to gauge my reaction, but it wasn't the usual comfort he had when making me coffee. I was beginning to feel like he was hiding something, and that unsettling feeling in my chest was growing. "Hey, do you want me to make you some breakfast?" Jason asked, his voice a little too eager, almost forced. I nodded absent-mindedly, still trying to understand what had happened. "Yeah, sure," I said, trying to sound normal, though the odd taste of his coffee still lingered on my tongue. Jason went into the kitchen, and I caught myself staring at the empty mug he had handed me earlier. I looked at it carefully, as though the answer to the strange taste might reveal itself. The more I examined the mug, the more questions flooded my mind. There was nothing unusual about it at first glance, no strange residue or foreign object in the bottom. But then I remembered one thing. Jason had been acting off lately. We had been distant, yes, but not like this. There was something more to it, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the coffee was just the beginning. I stood up and walked toward the kitchen, my mind still spinning with possibilities. Jason was already busy at the stove, humming a tune. His back was to me, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. It was almost like he was trying to avoid looking at me. My thoughts were racing as I walked past him and opened the cupboard where we kept the coffee beans. I reached for the jar, and as I did, my heart skipped a beat. There it was, a new brand of coffee beans sitting in the corner of the shelf, one that I had never seen before. The jar looked unfamiliar, almost out of place. I pulled it down, inspecting it closely. The label seemed oddly generic, with a strange logo and no specific details about the brand. My mind began to race again. Why had Jason switched the coffee? I didn't have time to question myself further as Jason turned around just then. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a hint of nervousness. "What's wrong?" he asked, a forced smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't want to accuse him without knowing for sure, but my suspicions were growing by the second. Why hadn't he told me about the new coffee beans, and why had he made such a strange cup for me this morning? I stared at him for a moment, trying to read his expression. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of guilt maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Just a new brand?" I asked, holding up the jar of coffee beans. My voice sounded casual, but I could hear the undercurrent of suspicion in my words. Jason stiffened for a moment, his expression flickering before he quickly regained his composure. "Yeah, I thought I'd try something different," he said, turning back to the stove and avoiding my gaze. "It's no big deal." But something in the way he avoided my eyes told me that it was a big deal. He was hiding something. And in that moment, I knew that there was more to this situation than a simple coffee swap. Jason wasn't being honest with me, and whatever was going on, it was far more than just a new coffee brand. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wasn't going to jump to conclusions. But I had learned that if there was one thing I could trust, it was my gut. And right now, my gut was telling me that something was seriously wrong. The more I stood there in the kitchen, staring at Jason, the more the unsettling feeling in my chest grew. I couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. He was acting strange. His nervousness, the way he avoided eye contact, and now this bizarre coffee. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite fit together, but I was determined to figure it out. "Jason," I said, my voice steady but firm, "why did you change the coffee beans? You know we've been using the same brand for years. Why the sudden change?" He turned towards me, his face betraying a flicker of hesitation. He quickly wiped his hands on the dish towel and walked towards the counter, his eyes darting nervously between the coffee jar and me. "I just wanted to try something different, that's all," he said, but his voice didn't sound convincing. "I thought it might taste better. I didn't think it was a big deal." I took a step closer to him, staring at the coffee jar in my hand. I wasn't buying it. There was something off about this whole situation. It wasn't like Jason to suddenly change things up without consulting me, especially something as routine as our morning coffee. "If you wanted to try something new, why didn't you just tell me?" I asked, trying to stay calm. My suspicion was growing stronger. It wasn't just the coffee. It was everything. The secrecy, the distance, and the strange tension between us. I had been feeling it for weeks, but today something clicked. Something about the way he was acting told me he was hiding something, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it anymore. Jason's eyes shifted uncomfortably. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but he hesitated. The silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken words. He looked at the coffee jar in my hand, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of guilt pass over his face. "It's just coffee," he said quietly, almost as though he was trying to convince himself. "Why are you making a big deal out of this?" I couldn't contain it any longer. "It's not just about the coffee," I snapped, my voice shaking slightly. "This morning everything felt off. The coffee tasted strange, you've been avoiding me, and now this. What's going on, Jason?" His face paled, and he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "It's nothing," he replied quickly, but his response only made me more suspicious. The way he avoided my questions was telling. He was hiding something, and whatever it was, I was determined to find out. I set the coffee jar down on the counter with a loud thud. "You've been distant for weeks. First you cancel our plans, then you stop sharing things with me like you used to. And now you make me coffee that tastes weird and avoid me when I ask you about it. This isn't nothing, Jason. What aren't you telling me?" Jason took a deep breath and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, it's complicated, okay?" he finally admitted. "I didn't want to bring this up, but I guess it's time. I've been struggling with a few things, and I didn't want to burden you with them." The moment I heard those words, I felt a cold wave wash over me. Struggling with what? Why hadn't he told me sooner? We had been a team for so long, and now it seemed like he was pulling away, keeping secrets from me. The trust we had built over the years was starting to crack, and I wasn't sure if I could repair it. "What kind of things?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The fear of what he might say next hung heavily in the air between us. The coffee, his distance, the nervous energy in his demeanor, it was all starting to make sense in a way I didn't want to accept. Jason hesitated, avoiding my gaze. "It's about work," he finally said, his voice sounding almost apologetic. "I've been feeling overwhelmed. There's been a lot going on at the office, and I didn't want to stress you out with it, but I've been trying to figure things out. And the truth is, I didn't handle it well." I could feel the weight of his words sinking in, but there was something about his explanation that didn't quite add up. The more I listened, the more it felt like he was hiding something much bigger. He had been distant for weeks, and now, this sudden confession about stress at work seemed too convenient. Was that all it was? Or was there something else he wasn't telling me? I felt a rush of frustration. "Jason, if you're going through something, you need to tell me. You can't just shut me out and expect everything to be fine. We've been through everything together. I can't help you if you don't let me in." Jason's face softened for a moment, and he stepped closer to me. "I know, and I'm sorry," he said, his voice softer now. "I've just been dealing with a lot, but I swear it's nothing you need to worry about." I didn't know whether to believe him or not. There was something in his eyes, something that made me feel like there was more to the story than he was letting on. But in that moment, I couldn't push him further. I needed answers, and I wasn't about to let this go. The coffee wasn't just coffee, it was a signal, a sign that there was something I needed to uncover. Despite Jason's apology and his attempt to explain things away with work stress, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling in my gut. Something didn't sit right. The coffee, the distance, his reluctance to fully open up, it was all starting to feel like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite fit together. I knew him better than anyone, and I could tell when he was hiding something. And at that moment, it was clear. He wasn't being entirely honest with me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Jason," I said, my voice calm but firm, "if you're really going through something, I need you to be honest with me. I can't keep guessing what's going on. You've been pulling away for weeks, and I'm starting to feel like I'm in the dark." Jason shifted uncomfortably. He ran his hand through his hair again, a habit I knew meant he was avoiding something difficult. "I swear, it's just work. I'm under a lot of pressure. I didn't want you to worry about it." I nodded, trying to appear understanding, but my mind was racing. Just work? Was that all there was to it? I knew that sometimes people needed space, but this felt different. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like something bigger was at play. The weird coffee, the strange smell, his distant behavior. It wasn't just about work. It couldn't be. "Jason, I don't believe that," I said softly, stepping closer to him. "This is more than just work. There's something you're not telling me, and I need to know what it is because this isn't normal." He sighed heavily, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in what felt like hours. "Okay," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to hurt you, but the truth is I've been seeing someone else. I never meant for it to happen. It just did." The words hit me like a slap across the face. My heart dropped into my stomach, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I had heard him right, hadn't I? He'd been seeing someone else? The man I had shared my life with, the person I trusted more than anyone, had been unfaithful. The betrayal was more than I could comprehend. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't he told me sooner? "I'm so sorry," Jason continued, his voice shaking. "I didn't want to hurt you. I know I've messed up. I never wanted to betray you like this, but I can't keep living this lie. I've been seeing her for the past 2 months. It was supposed to be a mistake, but I don't know how it happened. I was confused. I never meant for it to go this far." I could feel my face turning red with anger. My hands were trembling, and the weight of what he had just confessed was too much to bear. I took a few steps back, trying to process the words that kept swirling in my head. I felt completely shattered, but there was a part of me that was also furious. How could he? "You've been seeing someone else?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "For 2 months? You've been lying to me, Jason. Every single day. And you think you can just tell me now and expect everything to be okay?" He looked down at the floor, guilt written all over his face. "I know I've done something unforgivable. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I couldn't keep lying to you. You deserve the truth." I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at him. The tears threatened to fall, but I refused to let them. I was angry. So angry. I had trusted him with everything, and he had thrown it all away. But I knew that crying wasn't going to fix anything. I needed to think, to process. I needed to get some control over the situation. I couldn't let this defeat me. "You should have told me," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion. "You should have told me before it got this far." Jason nodded, his face pale. "I know, I've been a coward, and now I've lost everything." I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. Part of me wanted to scream, to shout at him for what he had done to me. Another part of me wanted to walk out, leave him, and never look back. But a small voice in my head reminded me that I wasn't going to let him control me. I wasn't going to let his actions define my future. I turned away from him and walked into the living room, my mind racing. I couldn't deal with this right now. Not like this. I needed space. I needed time to think. "Get out," I said softly, my back still turned to him. I can't be around you right now." Jason didn't say anything for a long moment, but then I heard the sound of his footsteps slowly walking away. He didn't argue. He didn't try to explain. He just left, and I was left standing there trying to hold myself together in the aftermath of his betrayal. As the door closed behind him, I felt an overwhelming rush of emotions: anger, hurt, confusion, but beneath it all, a growing sense of determination. He had taken something from me, but he hadn't taken everything. I wasn't going to let him define me, let him control my emotions, or ruin my future. I was going to rebuild. The next few days passed in a blur. I moved through the motions, barely able to process the depth of the betrayal. The house that had once felt like a home, filled with laughter and love, now felt like a cold, empty shell. I didn't know where to start or what to do, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living like this. I had to make decisions, and I had to make them fast. Jason was gone, and though I was still filled with anger, there was also a sense of relief in the air. He had taken his things, left me with the pieces of my broken heart, and now it was up to me to pick them up. I knew I couldn't stay in this house forever. Too many memories, too much history. I needed a fresh start, away from him and everything he had put me through. I spent the next few days meeting with lawyers, trying to figure out how to protect myself. Jason had emptied our joint account, and though I had access to some of my own savings, I needed to make sure that I was financially stable. I couldn't rely on him anymore, and I wasn't going to let him get away with what he had done. The legal process was overwhelming, but I forced myself to push through, to get everything sorted. If I was going to move forward, I needed to make sure my foundation was solid. I also reached out to some of my closest friends and family members. I didn't want to burden them with my problems, but I needed their support more than I realized. They rallied around me, offering words of comfort, support, and practical help. I wasn't alone, and for the first time in a long while, I realized that I didn't need him to be whole. I had so much love and support around me. But despite all the comfort, there were still the sleepless nights, the moments when I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I couldn't help but replay the conversations, the small signs I had missed, the times when Jason had seemed off. How had I not seen this coming? I had thought I knew him, but I had been wrong. I had trusted him with everything, and now I was left questioning my own judgment. How could I have been so blind? It was during one of these sleepless nights, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, that I realized something. I was stronger than I had given myself credit for. Sure, I was broken right now, and the betrayal still stung, but I wasn't going to let this define me. I had been through tough times before, and I had always come out on top. This wasn't the end for me. It was just the beginning. The next morning, I made the decision to take control. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I was going to rebuild my life. I started making lists of things I needed to do, things I needed to change. I didn't just want to survive this, I wanted to thrive. I was going to turn this pain into fuel for a new chapter in my life. I also started to look at the house. It felt like a prison now, not a home. Too many memories, too many reminders of a life that was no longer mine. I made the decision to sell it. I didn't know where I was going to go yet, but I knew I couldn't stay here, surrounded by the remnants of my failed marriage. The process of packing up and finding a new place wasn't easy, but it was one of the first steps toward healing. I was taking back control of my life, and that felt like the right decision. As I continued with the process of moving forward, I began to realize that this was more than just a fresh start. It was an opportunity to rediscover who I was, what I truly wanted, and what mattered most to me. I had spent so many years building my life around someone else that I had lost sight of myself. Now it was time to find me again. It wasn't just about leaving Jason behind. It was about finding myself, my passions, my strength, and my independence. I signed up for a yoga class, something I had always wanted to try but had never made time for. I spent more time with friends, reconnected with old hobbies, and even started taking on new challenges. Every small step forward was a victory. But there was one thing I knew for certain. I wasn't going to let this setback define me. The pain of betrayal would always be there, but I wasn't going to let it control my future. I was going to build a life that was mine, a life full of possibilities, love, and strength. As the days and weeks passed, I began to see real changes in myself. The pain of what Jason had done still lingered, but it no longer controlled my every thought. I was building my life again, brick by brick, and with each passing day, I felt a little stronger, a little more like the woman I had been before the betrayal, before the doubts. I was rediscovering who I was and, more importantly, who I could be. I moved into a small apartment, one that felt like mine, a space where I could breathe and be free of the memories that had haunted the house. The first night I spent there, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't a grand house or anything spectacular, but it was mine. I had created this space for myself, and it felt good to be in a place where I was in control of everything. For the first time in a long time, I felt empowered. I focused on my career, dedicating myself to the work I was passionate about. I took on new projects, connected with new clients, and began to see my professional life flourishing in a way I hadn't in years. I had always been driven, but now, with everything that had happened, there was a newfound clarity in my work. Every task I completed was a reminder that I was capable, that I could achieve without relying on anyone else to define my worth. But it wasn't just my career that I focused on. I began to repair the relationships that had been strained during my marriage. I reached out to old friends I hadn't seen in a while, and slowly, my circle of support grew stronger. I spent more time with my family and rediscovered the joy of being around people who genuinely cared for me, not for what I could give them, but for who I was. My therapy sessions continued, and each week I learned more about myself, why I had stayed in the marriage for so long, why I had allowed myself to lose sight of my own needs. I came to realize that self-worth wasn't something that could be found in another person. It was something that had to come from within. And once I accepted that, I felt the weight of Jason's betrayal begin to lift piece by piece. It wasn't long before I started dating again. At first, the idea of being with someone else felt strange, almost foreign. But I was different now. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me. I was looking for someone to share my life with, someone who would treat me with the respect and love I deserved. And when I met David, everything clicked. He was kind, thoughtful, and most importantly, he accepted me for who I was, whole and independent. I wasn't looking for him to fix me or save me. I was already fixed. I had saved myself. Jason never reached out again, and while part of me wondered what had happened to him, I realized that it didn't matter anymore. I had spent so much of my life living in the shadow of his actions, wondering what I had done wrong. But the truth was, I hadn't done anything wrong. He was the one who had failed, and now I was moving on, building a future that was all my own. As the months went by, I learned to live without regret. I didn't look back at the past with bitterness anymore. I had grown stronger because of it, and I knew that whatever the future held, I was ready for it. No matter what came my way, I knew that I could face it. The journey hadn't been easy, but I had made it through. And as I stood in my new life, surrounded by people who loved and supported me, I realized something important. The best revenge wasn't in getting back at Jason, it was in living my life to the fullest. I had taken everything he had thrown at me and turned it into strength. I had taken back my power, my life, and my happiness. And that was the greatest victory of all.